Thank you, Mr. Holscher. In talking with you and others at Department of Justice, they made clear that solutions come from the bottom up, and that's the vision behind the workbook, this event, and the conversations thus far. I want to recap just a few things we accomplished yesterday before we turn to this morning's focus. We talked about how to use data to be responsive to crime trends and people with mental illness and addiction in the criminal justice system. We talked about crime rates being historically low, but that we're seeing upticks in certain types of violent crime in certain areas. Police chiefs and experts told us what works to tackle these rising rates of violent crime, but that the analysis and resources needed to apply what works, especially in less urban departments where we're seeing violent crime increase, are not available. To be helpful, we highlighted how states need to use data to zero in on specific drivers of crime, to find ways to support local law enforcement in applying what we know works. We talked about how behavioral health and criminal justice system are coming together like never before to address the opioid crisis, which has claimed more than 4 times the number of lives than homicide in 2016, and so much more needs to be done to identify those in need of treatment, to ensure the range of services are available, to improve the effectiveness of treatment, and to further integrate our health and justice systems. We then turned to what next steps are needed to scale up efforts to reduce recidivism. We highlighted how states have shown it is possible to cut recidivism rates for people leaving prison by 7, 13, 20, 25% statewide. We also learned how critical it is for us to expand those efforts to beyond people leaving prison to people on probation, where there are 4 times the number of individuals and we can have a bigger impact on crime. To do this important work, to cut crime and recidivism, we heard time and again how it will take leadership. And Governor Bevin challenged all of us to be that kind of bold, sustained funding, which we'll talk about this morning, and data to track the progress that we are making. So in this last part of the summit, we turn to how your state can generate savings for more cost-effective corrections and sentencing policies to reinvest in the strategies we talked about yesterday. We'll once again refer to the last section of the workbook. We're making our way all the way through it. Pages 58 through 71 have information on your state's corrections trends. In 2006, states were projected to see the prison population rise by 13%. But instead, since then, the prison population nationally has dropped by 5%. States have bent their growth curves, saved or averted billions of dollars in prison expenditures, and they've reinvested hundreds of millions of dollars into programs that work better and cost less. Trends in your prison, parole, and probation populations are different in every state. You can look at them on page 60. While states such as New Jersey have seen their prison populations decline alongside drops in violent and property crime, it's critical that each state project their prison populations into the future to inform budget and policy conversations. Through the course of preparing for the summit, we reached out to all 50 corrections agencies and talked with your research staff to gather the extent to which there were state prison projections in hand. 29 of your states have these projections, and out of those 29 states that have projections in place, 21 of you told us you're looking at growth in your prison systems over the next 1, 5, 10, 11 years. Some are projecting fairly stable growth, just 5%, say over 6 years. Others are looking at 10, 20, or even 30% increases in their prison populations. If you're from these states, you know that you'll soon be at a crossroads. You'll either invest hundreds of millions of dollars to accommodate this growth, or as you'll hear from the panelists in a minute, you can examine why that population is climbing and find more cost-effective ways to hold people accountable, and potentially reinvest some of those savings that would otherwise be spent in reducing crime and recidivism and improving how we respond to people with mental health and addiction. Over the last decade, 33 states here have done just that, to respond to upticks in incarceration and to target policies to bend the curve to avert growth. So many of these states have been successful because they've taken the approach that used data, their own data, to cast a spotlight where they could deliver better outcomes for less cost. Not unlike what we heard works yesterday in policing, to use data to address crime upticks to reduce and improve public safety. Many states have already enacted these policy changes to do one or more things, but there's so much more that every state can explore. This workbook has data points on 5 fronts that we see many states exploring. The first is we see state after state looking at revisiting sentencing policies and laws for drug and property offenses. We see states looking at improving the sanctioning strategy for people violating conditions of supervision. We see states using data to make the parole board decision-making process more rational and transparent. We're looking at states using methods to focus limited supervision resources on those individuals who are most likely to reoffend, and to ensure that people who are at high risk of reoffending have a period of supervision after release. On page 65, we've highlighted some of the states and the percentage of people in prison who are there for property or drug offenses, at least in their current offense, understanding that many of these people may have criminal histories that include other or violent offenses. This can help you get a sense of how your state ranks compares to others in terms of use of incarceration in responding to property and drug offenses. We also pulled data from 17 states where we could actually see the proportion of people coming into prison that were either probation or parole revocations, to give you a sense of the impact that has on your prison admissions. And we looked at the number of people on felony probation and got this information from our structured interviews to give you a sense of those states, 6 states, that have more than 1% of the state population not under probation generally, but felony probation. And we'll talk about in a minute how focusing those resources on the first year of supervision can make such a difference in terms of getting a better return on investment to target those most likely to reoffend. It's my pleasure to introduce Adam Gelb from the Pew Charitable Trusts to introduce and moderate this morning's panel, to highlight how states have used data to find ways to reduce spending and reinvest in strategies to reduce crime, recidivism, and address behavioral health. Please join me in welcoming Adam Gelb.